Good morning to everybody. I'm sorry, I'm a product of this world of chaos. And so, till about an hour back, as chaotic and as disorganized as I function in my commitments to things, Chandu will know that I always show up for things at the last minute, unprepared for things. I thought I was on a panel, but I just got to know that I'm speaking by myself. So, bear with me if I do a terrible job with this, but I will try my best. But because it's about CarrotLane, it comes naturally. So I hope to be good at this as well. For those of you who don't know, CarrotLane, founded in end of 2008, was conceived to be a business based out of Chennai for one very good reason, was that it has the fastest clearing airport in the country. Even customs doesn't know that, but that's what our data figured out, that if I got anything in, and we started off focusing on solitaires tremendously, this would be the port where I could clear fastest and get it out. And that was something, at least we were very, very fixated about. It didn't happen because I live in Chennai. I mean, there was never a reason to that's never been a reason for me to do anything, because as a consumer business, this market we have the least focus is Chennai. We're hugely focused on North India, and which is why all our marketing activities and everything happen more out of North India. I'm going to break my conversation into a few parts. One, why we went digital. That's a relevant part to it. So I come from a family of jewelry, and I moved after studying in California to Chennai. Why Chennai? It was fairly simple. It had the second longest beach and 2 golf courses. So from California, that's the only commonality that I could find from it. Unfortunately, when I came here, the crowd on the beach as well as the crowd on the golf course was very, very different. There were only Koreans on the golf course, and there was nobody on the beach. So, but I realized that, and the good thing that my father told me was it was the third largest market for jewelry in this country, and so I should come here and start my career. The thing with Marwadis is that we're a tribe of nomads. So my great-grandfather started off in Ajmer. My grandfather grew up in Jaipur. My father was thrown to Bombay, and I was thrown to Chennai. So essentially, everybody is thrown out and said, go figure out what you need to do, because if you sit at home, you'll be nothing greater than disguised unemployed. That's what generally happens to the second sibling in any Marwadi house. We basically are disguised unemployed. So I moved to Chennai to set up Jaipur Gems, and I realized over the first few years that it's not as simple as it seemed when I was visiting my father's shop in Bombay. Nobody knows you. Life is very difficult. Getting your first customer to walk in is great, because that day you advertise and you get a lot of people in. But the next year after that is a disaster, because really, I mean, the day that ad dies out, people's memory also dies out at that point. Nobody walks in. I remember the first year of business used to be so difficult, but I made it a point to attend to every single person who walked in. And over a period of time, we built a successful franchise over there. In 2005, I decided that I need to open another store, because I've made sufficient amount of money to fund another store. And I opened a store in Coimbatore. My learnings from the first store were that you need to really know who your customers are. If you know those 100, 200, or 500 people who will ultimately be your shoppers. In the case of Jaipur Gems, it becomes like that because it caters to the top 2% of the city's population. You will be able to really make a difference significantly faster. So when we had 3 walk-ins a day when we opened in Chennai, to when we opened the first day in Coimbatore, getting the act right together and getting the first 500 most important people to come on the first day, I think that learning had transformed tremendously for us as well. The unsatisfactory part of it was that gold price kept rising at that point. For a lot of you are very young, but some of you might know that in 2001, gold, I mean, just to give you a benchmark, when I entered business, was about 300 rupees a gram. In 2007, gold was about 2,000 rupees a gram. Today, of course, it's 3,200 rupees a gram. So the rise in gold prices was not the same as what the rise in consumer spending power was. Obviously, people's spending power didn't go up 10x as such. So, which meant that the quantity consumption that we had for our product was significantly coming down. You might spend, if you're spending 2 lakh rupees for a wedding, you might spend 3 lakh rupees. You're not going to spend 20 lakh rupees. That's just not going to happen, because your income's not going to rise in the same way. So the result of this for my inventory was that I had more pieces of inventory in a shop, and this is true for every jewelry business, that you have more pieces of inventory in a shop than the total number of sales that you actually happen in a year. So I might have 100,000 pieces, but I make 90,000 invoices in a year. Inherently, that's a very bad inventory turn business. It also meant that for every piece that I had in my store, I had only 2 walk-ins per piece. So the possibility that I'll sell my entire inventory 5 times over in a year will never exist, because discovery just did not happen. At that time, also bigger stores were coming up. If you recollect, there was Kalyan, and GRT was getting bigger, and I forget, Joy Alucas had opened a mansion in T Nagar as well. All of this was very exciting stuff happening in the jewelry business, and because the price of gold was rising, everybody decided that there's one way to go, which is bigger the better with this. The fundamental problem I had with that was that however big your store is, or however big your campaign is, at the end of the day, if you put Aishwarya Rai outside your store, you're only going to find that one piece of jewelry which she's wearing. You only discovered one piece before you enter the store. And however big your store is, there's still only one door to enter from, and there's only one door to exit from, which means that discovery is still going to be a challenge. You're not solving the core problem, which is that for every piece of jewelry, there are only 2 walk-ins. And in the long run, that's the problem you need to solve. America was seeing some amount of digital activity. Jewelry has never been a very successful business in America in terms of on digital. Successful, but not compared to other categories as such. But the focus in America is very different on jewelry. The obsession for jewelry is very different in America than it is from India. On the store side of it, it took me 5 years to build the second store, and the family was very risk averse in terms of borrowing capital and doing things like that. So I realized that I'll be 60 by the time I have 12 stores, because that's the rate of growth we're going to have on this whole thing. And that was not working out for my ambitions, at least. So I decided to try and figure out how am I going to do this? How do I create a platform such that I have more visibility for consumers for the same product that I'm willing to sell as well? I knew it's too early. Taking it purely digital was too early. It was the same time Flipkart was coming up as well, and Infibeam was the flavor of the month. Actually, Infibeam was the biggest at that point. So we would, and there were obviously, and a lot of disservice was done to e-commerce by brands like India Times, India World. There's one more, I forget, Rediff.com. All of these guys had done a terrible job of service for customers. They were very oriented towards listing, but not oriented towards the last mile delivery, and consumers had terrible bad experiences. So I must say that e-commerce, when it began in India in 2009, really, it was built on the legacy of these bad experiences, which came from 2000 to 2009 as well. I say this because it's really important to know that where's this mistrust for consumers also coming from. The early adopters didn't have a great time doing this. So the desire to increase my footprint to a larger audience, the desire to make inventory turn a viable option, made me believe that the right way to solve this, and I look at every business problem as a mathematical equation. The right way to solve this would be that if I get more consumers on one end and I get more discovery because of that, even if conversion is lower at the other end, the net effect of this will be such that in the long run, the visibility will create more transactions itself. We were seeing some signs of this happening in America by 2010-11, when we saw that mobile had really started to take off itself. Mobile as in mobile phones. I don't mean mobile as a technology. People were actually coming to buy Apple phones not because they would come to the store and discover it. They had already discovered it online. They were only coming to choose the phone in the store. Which one did they want, 32, 16, whatever the choices were. People were buying Android phones or Apple phones. The decision for that was already done at home itself. They didn't go to a shop to choose whether they were going to buy an iPhone or an Android. I think most of our buying process would reflect that also. There's a certain set of consumers who were sure they'll buy it online. There was the other set who wanted to still go to the store and buy, but the decision was made online itself. They had made up their mind when they browsed or they researched or they spoke to their friends and figured out what they need to do with it. So discovery online was established, and that was the moment we decided that India really is there as well, where discovery will definitely happen online, and what we need to figure out is then consumer will choose his moment, where does he want to fulfill, whether he wants to fulfill his requirement online, offline, or whichever other way as well. That's when we opened our first store in 2011, our first Carrot Lane store. It's ironic, it took us a year because the first store was a complete disaster. And we were like, what have we just done? I mean, I think what people call today trial rooms, fitting rooms, that's the equivalent of what we built at that time as well. Any business without ROI has no meaning in the long run. And it was very evident from that store that we just got the platform completely wrong. We went and opened a really nice Apple-like white store with iPads lying around, tables over there, people to come and discover, but we forgot a key ingredient in the whole thing. We put no jewelry over there. We just put a browsing room for people to come and try on, and we have samples a little bit here and there, but absolutely bare product sitting over there. So when a consumer walks in, it's really important to know that he doesn't walk in to not try on the product. He comes in to try on the product. In hindsight, it sounds so stupid, but it's a mistake that we made in 2011, which cost us a year and a half at least. We presume that the consumer is as obsessed with technology as we were about it as well. They would want to browse online even in our store, which really sounds stupid, but that's exactly what we did. And we let them down with what our approach was at that time. Omni was really not even a word. I didn't even know the word Omni till 2 years back. I just knew I'm also opening shops. That was all that we knew that we were doing as well at that point. We reworked the plan and we came back to a new format and we went to a mall and opened a store. Our first store opened in Bangalore. It opened at the Phoenix Mall itself. We put only jewelry there and our app, which is our Perfect Look app. Our app allows you to try things on. Basically, it solves a problem. The problem is that women, when they go to a jewelry store, if they want to try out 20 earrings, it's really painful to keep removing a earring, trying the next one, removing it, trying the next one. So it allows you to try on earrings on your face real time, and you can move your face left and right because they love looking in a mirror in multiple angles. So that changed the trajectory and the thought process we had, or the ROI, or everything else. Our cost of acquisition, which to be honest with you, all the way till 2012, I was not sure what are we building, because the cost of acquisition was so high that it would take 3 transactions for us to make money with that customer. And I know, being in the jewelry business, or any consumer business for that matter, unless and until you sell everything like Flipkart does, 3 transactions is not guaranteed, because you need to sustain your brand for that long as well in the consumer's mind. And jewelry is a product that at best is bought twice a year if you take an average of it as well. But the stores were a game changer for us. It completely changed the way we approached our business as well. This whole thought process of discovery started falling into place. Consumers started discovering online, walking into our store in Bangalore with a cell phone in their hand or with their iPad in their hand saying, this is the product I saw online, I want to try this on offline. The combination of allowing people to browse online, make the discovery, made sure that we were in their consideration set significantly before they walked into any other jewelry store. So here's the scenario, right? I am right here in your hand. You have discovered the design you want to buy from me over here. You have also discovered that there are these other brands that I want to go and browse over there. Now, if the experience of that will decide whether they will come forward in the same consideration set or not. If the experience is not great, they will not come forward. You will then go forward with the product that you've discovered on Carrot Lane itself, and then make your buying decision based on that. The transformation for us in 2013 was so strong with this that from a store where we were doing no sales, and which also meant that we had no inventory, so no sales as well, we transformed to a extremely efficient inventory turn business. We went from a traditional business, to give you a sense, like a Tanishq showroom, or which is one of the better run ones, is a 2 inventory turn business. A family business is like a 1.2 inventory turn business. The stores opened at 8 inventory turns for us, and that dramatically altered the way people perceived what we were doing over there. We realized we don't need 20 million of Indian consumers, 30 million of Indian consumers who are online to come and visit us. We need 1 million of them to come and visit us at any point, because 1% of that, if they convert using our store and online, we are home free with this business as well. We will start moving in the right direction. we finally had some method to this whole madness, saying that, yes, discovery is happening. Where will conversion happen from? And that led to believe that conversion will happen essentially from the centers where we are going to build our stores. So we took Delhi as a case in point, and we opened 6 stores in Delhi about 2 years back. Today, 38% of our revenue comes from Delhi. It's a profitable city for us in terms of, for the money we spend on marketing and the return that we get on it, minus our expenses of selling goods and service. I say this because there are so many definitions of profit nowadays. But if you considered EBIT as a profit or as a metric on that, it's the only city that's profitable for us. Because with digital, you also require distribution. You can't think of digital without distribution. Digital is your influencer, but distribution is your consumption point. And depending on the category you're on, if you don't connect the two together, your mathematical equation is not solved. And if you don't solve your equations, your business will never make sense on that as well. It took me 6 years to figure out there's math in my business as well. I only thought it was about beauty and selling designs and everything. But there is far more to it, and there's far more thought process that goes behind it. I'm going to run you guys through a couple of slides, not to bore you with it, but over the last 6 years, I built my business into an extremely metric-oriented business. And I saw a lot of you had questions about metrics around it, and it would be very interesting to see whether, if any of this applies to you, and at some point, if you all want as well, we can help with these kind of metric thought process. So, yeah, Yeah, to fund the business in the beginning, we started off as a B2B and a B2C business. We've moved from being 95% B2B in 2009 to becoming, I think, 15% B2B today on that. This, of course, is the simplest sheet that you have as a CEO of a business. I require all the time to see where am I on a plan versus actual, and it gives me my sales margin. Could you scroll down? All the way down, it breaks down my category, which will be a typical P&L that anybody has to see in any business as well. So that's your master sheet on something on this. FD income, because as you all know that when you get funded, you get a lot of money from there. That's the only money you really make. The rest of it is just losses on most things. Can I go to priorities? Just up all the way. Yeah. So as your priority, you're going to list down a certain set of activities which you want to track on a month-to-month basis. Some of these actually, the scorecards month-to-month, but they are tracked on a daily and a weekly basis as well. And different people have, line items are owned by different people, and that's how it's further divided. So how many visits are you expecting? What are you actually doing against that? What are your direct visits that you're doing? How is it growing month on month? Because if you go to the extreme right of this sheet, you'll see there is a month-on-month percentage that happens for everything also on this. It further breaks down into paid, natural search, referral, quality of traffic as well. Keep going down, you can keep going down. Search leads, where they land up from, paid leads, where they land up from. Unless and until you capture every sense and every essence of data. I have 4,000 data points I look at every month. And you'd think this is a jewelry business. But the point is that unless you build yourself a robust system like this to try and understand, you'll never be able to shift the needle enough to make that difference happen as well. Of course, visit to lead is the most important conversion. And when you do digital attribution, which I'll come back to, a lot of you asked that question, it's very important to understand there is a cost per lead, there is a cost per conversion, and there is a cost for traffic. You must be able to attribute all of this very well for yourself, because if you don't do that, the end ROI is not going to make sense to you as well. Yeah, SKUs. Let's go to cohort next. If every customer came the first month, how many times he came, in which month again, what's his purchase cycle, how does every customer behave? Customers acquired in Jan, how do they behave? Customers acquired in Feb, how do they behave? Customers acquired in March, how do they behave? There is no data point you can think of which will not make it to this sheet as such. But what you'll make decisions is, we'll move to the priority sheet on this. I can keep going on. This data sheet is so extended that I think the analytics team in CaratLane does a phenomenal job in building how this business is going to lay out itself also. You go into core metrics, you'll find even more detail about what you saw in the first 3 slides. You go into category, you'll see visits at category level, conversion at category level, conversion at price point level, at SKU level. Everything and anything that you can ever imagine, you need to, if you can ask yourself that question, you need to have an answer to that as a metric as well. I wanted to open that up because a lot of people wonder how much data do you have. It's never too little data. What you require is clarity on what is the data that you want to capture and what is the data you want to take an action item based on. And that's where the priority sheet comes into the picture in that. It's something that it's taken us 6 years to figure out. I don't think there's an easy answer to it as such, but the more you break down your business in data points, the easier this becomes as well. In my business, it's still harder, I feel, because the number of transactions will be never close to anything that big data can do. So for us, we have to do a lot of this manually. We will never be able to do that. In a B2B business, I think it's easier to do. I don't think it's harder to do at all. I run a B2B and a B2C part of it as well. And so I feel it's a lot easier to do on a B2B side of data. There's tools available out there which do a lot of good work. I mean, there's a tool we resorted to, a website called Marketing Sherpa, and they do, it's a B2B resource as such, and I think they do a phenomenal job in telling you where a lot of this data comes from as well. I mean, how do you think about this data? How do you approach customers, and how do you do that? Chennai is a largely B2B market, and that's why I wanted to emphasize on that point as well. My approach to data changed dramatically once I realized the value from the first data point that made a difference as well. We started this business on 2 metrics, which even today we track the most. One is the cost of consumer acquisition. When I started off and when you get funded first up, money is like oxygen, you know. And human body is like iron. So money can corrupt you very, very easily. And that's what it does to e-com businesses as well. We were corrupted on day one, and we basically went out and splurged like there was no tomorrow. I'm not proud of what I did, but that's ultimately what happens, because you're trying to, you read Times of India or Economic Times and you only hear rubbish stories about 300% and 500% and 1000% growth and nobody tells you negative margins and everything else like that. But you get pressurized into believing that this is what you want to do as well. There is a natural growth every business can happen. And that discovery of what is your natural growth and what is the little push that you can do about that is very important to do. We didn't learn that with our first 2 rounds of funding. We learned that only post the 3rd and the 4th round of funding as well. It took us, I must say that we were lucky that we were allowed to make the first 2 rounds of funding as mistakes. Okay, those mistakes still might be much smaller than the mistakes a lot of other people have made, but they were still mistakes as far as I'm concerned on it. But it's really important to know that your market sizing is best in your hands, is best in your ability to push. It's not in somebody else's hands to tell you how big it is or how big the opportunity can be. It's a question of how well have you understood your data points and how much are you pushing it to take it to, can you take it 5% higher every month? Can you just focus on a smaller goal rather than focusing on saying that I'm going to take it 300% higher this year or 500% higher next year? In SaaS applications, you might still see that because it's much, much easier. But if you're in goods and services, or if anything that ends up as a product in the consumer's hand, I think you should be a lot more careful about the way you do this. SaaS businesses will always have an acceleration point. E-com businesses or services business, goods businesses will not have that. It's like a carpenter and a software engineer. A really good carpenter will give you 20% or 30% elasticity on the quality of work he does. But a really good software engineer, his bandwidth to expand is almost 10x. The way he writes a code can make sure they get 10x elasticity in the output that he gets. But a carpenter can only give you a 30% more elasticity on it. And that's the difference between SaaS products and e-com businesses. E-com businesses have a margin which is significantly smaller. SaaS businesses have a play which is significantly wider over there. So if they tremendously lose money upfront, they still have a chance to make up for that. E-com businesses will never have a chance to make up on that money the way SaaS businesses will have. I know my example is a little crude, but I always think that we are the carpenters, and Girish, who runs Freshdesk and a good friend of mine, is the software coder on that part of it. There's a question somebody had about approach to measuring ROI for digital marketing versus traditional. See, measuring digital is very easy. Google Analytics, you set it up and you're going to get a significantly easier roadmap to it as well. You will know exactly what you're doing. What you need to figure out is there is a cost for every visit that you get. What is the cost you're willing to pay for it? There is a cost for every lead that you generate. Because the guy who generates the lead is not in control of having that converted to business. You need to figure that out. What will it take? It could be distribution, it could be pricing, it could be many things. So when I look at my business, I have a concept called try at home. So we have a different attribution for try at home. We are willing to pay more money for try at home. We are willing to pay lesser money for a lead, obviously. We are willing to pay a far more money for a person willing to visit our store because the average transaction value is significantly higher. For every business, you need to know what is the cost you're willing to pay for every action item that takes place on your site. Because your profitability is different on each of these things. A guy buying a gold coin for me gives me very little profit. A guy buying a solitaire from me gives me some profit. And a guy buying ready-made jewelry from me gives me a little more profit on that. So how can I have the same attribution model for all three of them? I cannot have that. And so it's really important to understand your own attribution model, break it down into every consumer type, every action that you have against it, and then see that which is more scalable and which is less scalable on that. So, in services also you have that, right? You have businesses which give you 30% output, and then there are those that give you 10% as well. So based on that, you'll have to figure out where. You can't give up on any one of these. You have to do all of them, but the scale of all depends on what is your attribution model that you decide on that. When we did that for digital and went on to traditional media, it was hugely challenging for us because here's a medium where I had every single data point available, and I go to television, and it's a sham. I mean, there is some TRP rating, and there is some other rating agencies they have, which basically rate this entire country on the basis of 5,000 meters that they have available, set up in some random people's homes as such. Now, those 5,000 people might not even be relevant to an SEC A+ audience, might be relevant might be relevant for them, but not relevant for an SEC B+ audience, or whichever way you want to look at it. So that model just didn't make any sense for us. If I went on that, I would not be advertising on the TV channels I should be advertising on, and I would be paying more for the wrong channels which are not relevant for my business at all. So we decided we're going to turn this thing upside down completely and reinvent and bring our own model into it. It's a fairly elaborate model. I'm going to show you a couple of slides out of it. Yeah. Okay, my mic's gone, so I'll use this. So when you have TV advertising going on or newspaper advertising going on, at that point, you will always have, thanks. Hello? Not good. Hello? Yeah. When you have TV advertising or newspaper advertising going on, you will always have brand visits which goes up, which means that people searching for the word CarrotLane, either through Google or directly typing carrotlane.com should go up. Now, our aim was to figure out which television program at which hour has surge on which channel. We have 3 channels. We have mobile, we have desktop, we have tablet. And we wanted to see the impact of the ad at the same point. Our expectation was mobile and app will always have, mobile and tablet will have the highest impact, obviously, because you're sitting at home, you're in front of a TV, you see something you like, you're likely to punch in carrotlane.com on your cell phone. Nobody goes then walking to the desktop and goes and types carrotlane.com. So we went with that theory on this. What we wanted to find out was, which was the TV program that people were watching the most. In the TV program, there's an ad slot. There are 3 ads or 4 ads that come in between, and there are 3 ad breaks. Which ad break and which ad slot had the highest number of visitors coming to me from that point of it, and how do I map it on a minute-to-minute basis on that? And we switched that, and yeah, just move on to the next one. Yeah, so we switched that, and then we first, of course, this is at the channel level, telling us that which channel gave us how many visits at that point, and what was happening across this. Now you go into every channel, and you further break it down, and you start seeing that which program on which channel, the next one, sorry. Um, then, yeah. You can't see the graphs in this through. Just keep going, next. Okay, stop. Yeah. Then you want to see weekday or weekend. What happens? Which is better for you on that? Where do you get more visits? When you see on a weekend TV channel or a weekday TV channel? What I'm trying to get at is that you can analyze anything and everything. You just have to put your mind to it, and it needs nothing more than Excel. Google Analytics and Excel together can give you everything you can ever want to imagine on this. You can create every pivot possible. You can create anything out of this. Go on. There will be one which goes on to by next. Yeah, just stop any of this. So ultimately, what does it result in? It results in saying that if this channel has a 4.27 increase in CPV as against the 3.02, this is what the net result was. By analyzing that, moving money from one channel to another, we increased our visits from 3.02, whatever the multiple must be, into 100,000 or 1,000, whichever they must have. It increased to 4.27 because we switched an ad slot from a particular TV show in the second ad slot to maybe the third slot on another channel altogether. This all gets tied into the cost per spot as well further on, and then you get ROI essentially on the whole thing. The aim of the exercise is only one thing: maximum visits at lowest cost into the website. That's the goal that you're trying to achieve at. But everybody feels that traditional media cannot be broken down like that. But you really can. If you have a digital platform and you measure, use that only as measuring, nothing else. Ultimately, affinity comes from measuring. You might have an offline store and you can still do the same thing because the searches will move in the same direction. And searches ultimately will reflect in becoming traffic even into the physical store. And we've seen that ample number of times with that. Go to the last one. Just stop. Yeah. At the end of it, you will come up with a common emphasis on exactly what you need to do and what you should not be doing. And that's the analysis on a week-on-week basis. At the end of every campaign, we'll end up doing this. The reason for doing this week-on-week is because TV shows lose their importance very fast. Somebody is enjoying Bigg Boss in season 4 in week 2, but week 3 becomes boring. And you cannot go with the same data saying that because week 2 was doing well, I'm going to continue doing this on week 3. And you need to be able to make these shifts on a daily basis and move things around as well on that. That is just to give you a sense of how crazy you can go in analytics and figure out how much depth is available in this. It's not normal. Most people don't do this. It's now come to know across at least the Tiger portfolio companies. It's the Carrot Lane model. And we feel proud because that's something we developed here. And now Common Flow, Flipkart, all of them use this model to do their analysis on how to measure ROI on television itself. My last point that Sunil asked me to speak about was on the transformation that I expect digital to make on everything. I think discovery will be owned by digital. I think consumption will be owned by, in every channel, the percentage of consumption, whether it will be digital or whether it will be retail or not, will depend on what the product and the services that you sell. But one thing is very clear, that marketing money will shift more and more to digital. The average minute that we spend on the phone today or on the iPad, I actually don't even own anymore a laptop or a desktop. It's been about 6 months because I feel that's the way to live now. If you don't focus on this channel and if you don't focus on reaching out to your customer in any business through this channel, it could be vernacular, it could be English, it could be phones which are not of the same caliber as well. When I look back today at home, I think every household staff in my home is browsing online, is on WhatsApp, is on shopping online. I think they get more shipments at home than I get. And it's interesting that they are shopping on Amazon also. It's not that they just shop only on Flipkart itself as well. If that transformation is there today in 2008, and we have only 30 million internet shoppers, of these 30 million, 15 million are the ones who won't shop if there's no discount available. So really, we have only 15 million who are profit-paying shoppers online today. You can say that it's not growing, or the other way you can say that it will grow to becoming something very large. It's a question of how do you look at this whole pie as well. Whether India has spent too much money to acquire this transaction, I agree with all of you. I think a lot of us have made tremendous amount of mistakes on doing that part. Market has not scaled at the pace it would have, but had the market scaled at the same pace, what happened in the mobile world when cell phones went from a certain band, I think they all of a sudden shot up in 5 years like to 100x or something like that. We would not have been ready for it had we not spent that money as well. India is going to be possibly leading the digital transformation. I think our discovery and our appetite to consume more content, more things online is far greater than other places. This despite the fact that we, for a nation of our size, have the worst internet bandwidth ever. I think our 3Gs are really 2Gs. We hardly ever get a 3G connection anywhere. Our Reliance Jio is, I don't know when is it going to come to life. Every single week I hear it's coming, and it's been about a year now. But when all of this falls in place, which it will, at some point it all has to, I think the surge that we're going to see in the audience is just going to be tremendously large at that point. I think this 30 million audience that we see today will expand dramatically. We are so obsessed with focusing on the English-speaking audience right now that everybody goes behind the same audience. We have not even started to touch the rural audience yet, and their consumption is not going to be small at all. Their consumption is really, really large. At least when I see my category, urban consumption, rural consumption is a 50-50 split. I'm sure other categories I don't have knowledge of, but have equal domination over there as well, because population sits over there till today, and population does consume. So bottom of the pyramid businesses are going to see serious digital transformation. It's a question of when, not a question of whether it will happen or not. And with that, thank you so much. I'm sorry to be very badly prepared for this.
Yeah, we'll have a Q&A now. If any of you have questions for Mithun, please feel free to ask him now.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. See, in the correlation you made between the real world, the touch and feel, the electronic medium advertisement to judging the effectiveness of that vis-a-vis the traffic spikes, right? So there is an implicit assumption in that we are trying to measure the effectiveness of this mass medium advertisement on the impulse search that a person is making, or the instantaneous search the person is making, which is more appropriate. What if most of the search is happening with a lag? Are you capturing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So
and wouldn't that get mixed up with, I see this, you're advertising on multiple channels.
Agreed.
And how will you attribute the lag to?
Agreed. So the presumption in that is that the lag will apply to everybody. It will not apply to one person. So lag is taken as a constant. And if you take lag as a constant, then you say highest affinity is what will come right away against the spot which has come. That's still not as challenging. The challenging part one comes when you have two ads at the same time in two different channels.
Oh, yes.
So when that happens, there is definitely an issue with that. But you use surrogate, saying that same ad appeared another time and what happened, and you start building on that. There's a, at the end of the day, you'll have to make assumptions and create problem solving as well. Because if you don't do that, you'll only find a reason to find problems. You won't find a reason to find solutions. So with that approach that we have to find a solution, you will make your judgment calls. There has to be a hypothesis you need to prove as well to yourself.
Because
and that's
you're doing week-on-week tracking, so your lag
I do
also
day on day.
Okay, so your lag will also capture, probably at the best you will give a benefit of doubt for 24 hours?
No, I don't give a lag benefit only. I say lag is constant. So if lag is constant, it's going to impact every ad spot that came. There's no reason to believe that lag happens to Star World, but doesn't happen to Z Cafe or any other way as such. So lag for all will be constant across on this whole thing, and we'll go with that philosophy.
Thank you. So how do you view the way Exit? A lot of articles around there.
Exit from CaratLane. I love this. There's a guy called Mahesh Murthy who rapes me on TV every day. But so here's the thing. There are different funds, right? I have an angel investor who exited at 200x. He made tremendous money. I had Tiger Fund 1 and 2, which exited at 5x or something like that. No, sorry, 10x. Tiger Fund 1 did 10x, Tiger Fund 2 did 4x. Tiger Fund 4 is the one that lost 30%, 25% on that. When you're a jockey sitting on a horse, you must know that you're going to take your horse into which door on that point. 18 months back, it was clear to me that the right omni-channel partner for me is the Tata Group for this, because of their presence in jewelry, and I think the trust factor that comes along with it as well. At the same time, after that raise, I'd realized that our Bangalore store had really taken off. The way I want to build my store is through my online-offline integration. The board also agreed to it, that we're going to do a strong online-offline integration on this. With every money that you get in, when you get in money, there's a pre-money valuation and then there's a post-money valuation on this. You start spending money, your valuation goes down on this. After you spend money, you create value for that part. Unfortunately, in the case of the last round, we had just started to spend money on that. And we agreed that for Tiger, it's a philosophical issue that they don't do offline. They will not, it's a tech fund. So if it's a tech fund, it's going to be a harder job to do this offline business as well. And Lee Fixel told me one thing which I'll never forget in my life. And I was talking to him last night as well. He's one of the greatest guys. And I don't think there's an investor of his caliber in this country. It's unfortunate he doesn't talk to the press. He said to me, Mithun, my fund has 10 lives because I'll have more than 10 bets on it. You as an entrepreneur will have 2 to 3 lives. You might run 2 businesses, 3 businesses, you might do that. But CaratLane has only 1 life. And if you believe that Omni is the right strategy for it, then let's find the right partner together for it and make sure that we don't get hurt in the bargain, but we help you build that business to that level. I have never met a man, and I tell you, I've seen through enough things, and you will read the Red Bus story when it comes out itself, that when the investors left, how they completely raped the entrepreneur in their exit on that part of it as well. But I never met a guy who said money is not as important as the business is at that point. And the only parting words he has for Titan is, you have a great entrepreneur in him, make sure you take good care of him. So exits are not necessarily because you want to leave a business. It's also when you have a fundamental issue difference on that part. And if you notice that Omni becomes a way that we opened 13 stores last year. And that's completely against the philosophy of Tiger Global. One of the best bets in the world is Warby Parker, which is an eyewear store sitting in America. They don't expand their revenue, or they don't expand their investment in that for only one reason, because it's against the philosophy of doing, they are a digital first business as such. They are not a omni business. They don't have their fund philosophy is that. They might open another fund for it, and that might happen, but they wouldn't do it because of that. So as long as he was not losing money, and he made 60, 70 crores on that part from the first half, and what he took from the company is a different thing. As long as he's not losing money on it, and if it's the right thing for the business, he said we must do that part and do it. Yeah. And that was his graciousness that our success, or the reason I stand on this podium today, is because of Lee Fixel. So I'll always be grateful to him.
Mithun, as a fellow funder, you have funded several businesses. What are the mistakes, 3 mistakes that you see most entrepreneurs make when they go digital?
The beauty of digital is that you can measure everything. And the single biggest mistake that I made, and I'm going to speak from my own mistakes, is that I didn't understand that early enough. I didn't understand what to track. I didn't spend based on a hypothesis. I spent because people spend. I spent on Google, I spent on Facebook because you should do ads and do that part of it. But I didn't say that, hey, I'm going to spend on an ad with an intent to create this cost of acquisition for this kind of behavior. And if that's not happening, I'm going to tweak my ad or do whatever I need to do and do that. So money burns much faster than you really would want it to burn at that point. And that I think is the paramount mistake, because then that money gone never comes back to you as well. You might still say it's brand and something like that, but brand is faff for marketeers to say that I burned money and I have no idea what happened. So I strongly believe that the understanding of ROI is missing at early stage of your business. And that's something that for me came significantly later in life as well. The second, the sexiness of going and talking to newspapers and giving all that interview and saying that, hey, I got this funding, you must realize that unless you're a B2B business, Economic Times means nothing for you. You know, it has no value whatsoever. Your consumer does not even read that newspaper. I don't even know if consumer reads a newspaper today. That's a different thing altogether. But the Economic Times is something the consumer doesn't read at all. So don't focus on the wrong things, but focus on the right things that you need to build on that part. The third, don't spend too much time in investor relationships. That is a good investor will himself tell you that, just send me the metrics and we'll chat once a month. Bad investor will, every time I come to town, I want to have a meal with you and I want to have dine with you and I want to just have a chat with you and do that. That's actually just the worst way to spend your time as well. All your time should go in managing your customer and focusing on your customer rather than managing your investor on that. If your investor management time is very difficult, then you should not do. The investor relationship should be on a pull mechanism only. There is just no other way it should operate. You should be able to pull enough out of his ecosystem of other investments that he's done, and his role should be to facilitate that part of it so that you are able to leverage on his partnership with you. You should not be pushed into running a business which he has no idea of how to run anyways. I think managing investor relationships, understanding where ROI sits on your business, and figuring out how to scale with little things at every single point are the three things that I think we don't get it right early stage. We burn too much money. As I said, money is a corrupting agent, and human body is like iron. It's always going to happen. I can say that as much, but I'm going to make the same mistakes in my next venture also.